Okay, welcome to my final presentation for my argument and advocacy class. My name is Susanna Eidman Hicks, but you can call me Susie. And surprise, surprise, I'm going to be doing my final presentation on global warming, the big myth, but plot twist, it's not a myth. I'm going to talk about a little bit of the background going into it and the way that it's communicated to the public today. So, to begin my presentation, the initial situation, global warming. What is it? How did it start? So when we put carbon dioxide into our atmosphere, we create kind of a blanket around the world. And that's normal in very small doses. It actually helps keep our atmosphere safe. But what is happening is we are putting so much carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. It's such a high rate that it's kind of creating this heat trapping blanket that works as a feedback loop, that the more carbon dioxide that goes into the atmosphere, the thicker it gets and the warmer our planet becomes. Here's a timeline of the way that kind of the United States and the world has become aware of global warming. It started mainly in 1945. It did start, climate science did start before that, but one of the major scientific breakthroughs about global warming had to do with naval research that began doing research with climate. And then the feedback loop theory became apparent in 1956 with ice disappearance, that every time a piece of ice melts into water, the dark color absorbs more heat, thus melting more ice. Greenhouse effect, what I just said about CO2, researched on Venus, which is not Earth, but it is the first way that we figured out the way that it works. This continues to see scientists reporting CO2 rise, people trying to get into the environmental movement. The climate conferences began, and the Rio de Janeiro Convention created the Kyoto Protocol. So this isn't the most recent climate change news ever, but that does go into the underlying problem, which is that human apathy has been a huge issue for global warming since it became a thing. It was something that no one really prioritized and still doesn't prioritize today. The underlying problem also had to do with the political agenda in scientific phenomena. So right as the environmental movement became a thing, President Reagan was elected on a very anti-environmental platform, and he delegitimized many environmental claims, thus showing that if you were a Republican, you didn't really believe in protecting the environment. If you are a Democrat, you really believed in protecting the environment. He cut funding for climate research, and it became a politicized issue, alienating a very large chunk of people in the country. So climate change has had kind of a tainted name because of the political history behind it. So, who initiated the action? Our good old friend Al Gore, a hero, emerges. Politician and activist Al Gore, he took a college course at Harvard and thus became very invested in climate science and the state of our world. He then rose in the political ranks, becoming a representative and thus becoming the vice president of the United States under Bill Clinton. He created a lot of eco legislation like a carbon tax and heavily supported the Kyoto Protocol. He also brought a scientist named Carl Sagan to talk about climate change, who was famous for popularizing scientific phenomenon. So who built the consensus and legitimized the campaign? Dun da da da, surprise, it's also Al Gore. Al Gore really fronted this campaign and really created most of the backing for it in the United States. As vice president, he had a very large outlet to communicate to the American public. But even after he was vice president and he ran for president, he actually ran under the platform that he wanted to ratify the Kyoto Protocol. So the initial messaging that he created had many different forms. Initially in 1992, he wrote the bestseller Earth in Balance, and then in 2004 he began touring a slideshow that he made about climate change, And an Inconvenient Truth was born out of that. And an Inconvenient Truth was a revolutionary piece of media that really changed many people's minds. And an Inconvenient sequel, The Truth to Power, premiered just recently. I have yet to see it, but I plan on doing that this week. So, climate change in general has been communicated mainly through the form of documentaries to the American public, to the general public across across the world. Actually, it's the most common form of communication because it's the way that it shows truthful events that are happening surrounding climate change. Examples: An Inconvenient Truth, 6 degrees could change the world, Chasing Ice, Before the Flood, and Chasing Coral. These all show the degradation that human activity is doing towards the environment, and they all project issues that could happen if we do not stem the amount of carbon dioxide we put into the atmosphere. Another medium of communication is dystopian literature and dystopian movies, like Hayao Miyazaki creating Princess Mononoke and Nausea in the Valley of the Wind, which are all movies that have to do with what could happen if we really do not fix what we're doing with the climate. The disposition of the audience, for most people, An Inconvenient Truth was the first time they had ever heard the word global warming, was the first time they'd ever heard the words climate change, and it was shocking. So many people were really intrigued because this was a brand new concept to them, but a major roadblock for Gore was that he was inherently a political figure, which means that people are going to be skeptical about the way that he is communicating a scientific issue, which is why he made An Inconvenient Truth as apolitical as possible, trying to make sure that people knew that this was a scientific phenomena, not a political agenda that was attempting to be communicated. This also hurt his credibility a lot because he had ran and technically failed to achieve the presidency in the United States. So many people were skeptical about his motives. Many people did not find him qualified to talk about scientific communication. And actually, a South Park episode aired in April 2006 that made fun of Gore pretty heavily for his very vehement activism towards the environment, where he is very passionate about the existence of a phenomena called man-bear-pig. And no one believes him and nobody cares about man-bear-pig, but he keeps telling people that man-bear-pig is a thing. And because people gravitate so heavily towards comedy, it really did staunch his credibility in creating this phenomena around global warming. So since Al Gore, many opinion leaders have actually become involved in climate activism, including Obama, Justin Trudeau, who is the Prime Minister of Canada, and the one and only Leonardo DiCaprio. The two politicians have a lot of credibility around climate science because they are politicians as well, but Leonardo DiCaprio has been heading a documentary series called Before the Flood and has also stepped out as an activist for the climate. So desirable is a hard word when talking about the climate, but the main communication strategies that people use to communicate issues of climate change is future orientation, which means speaking about what is going to happen once climate change takes in effect if we do not change. So urging people to think about their grandchildren, urging people to think about 100 years from now what the Earth is going to look like, or to think about where the coral reefs will be or where the polar bears will be in 100 years and what is going to happen to them. Eliciting empathy is important because a lot of the issues of climate change that are happening right now are not areas that we can see. It's happening to the poor, it's happening to people in desert areas with a lot of forest fires, and it's happening to island nations that are experiencing temperature rise and ocean rising. So being able to create that visibility of the people that are struggling is a very, very strong communication strategy of climate change. Fear and danger is one that is used for pretty much everything, not just climate change, but creating that imminent danger that your house will be underwater, your family will have to evacuate, water wars will become a thing if you do not change the way that you are. Challenging Ways of Life is a little bit more laid back version of Fear and Danger, saying that your life will become more inconvenient the more climate change is continuing. So the cushy lifestyle you have right now may be changed once it's too hot to go outside, or once all of the native plants die, or any animals that we use that kind of control our ecosystems go extinct. Um, is it effective? Hopefully. Oh, here's hoping that it is. Scientific communities are in 97% agreement that climate change is real and happening, and many cities are creating climate action plans in order to combat the effects of climate change. So major government and major political figures are really believing this, but in our current administration, many people are preaching that it is fake. But thanks to the activism of people like Al Gore and Obama and Leonardo DiCaprio, the message is still being communicated to the general public that it is real and it is happening, and that we need to change our ways in order to make sure that it does not get any worse. Here are my sources, and thanks for tuning in.